Hello, and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been going through various chronic diseases, and I'm going to continue with it. I had given some thought about stopping it at some point and then going on to something else, which of course I will do eventually. But then I decided there's a lot of reasons for me to continue to do this. For example, there is a field of psychology known as physiological psychology, and in this field we study the differences in illnesses and what they do to the brain and how they cause the brain to function differently. And so I think it's important. You know, doctors have specialties. You could go to a heart surgeon or a neurologist or one that deals with intestines and all of that. They have their areas of specialty, and so does psychology. You can specialize in learning. You can specialize in child development, but you can also specialize in illnesses, diseases, the physiology of the body and what it does to your mind. And so therefore I want to continue with this, and I have a few more to go before we switch off to something else. So today I've decided to start off with a discussion and information about Zika, because Zika is an illness that a lot of people have, not in this country, but in the countries that are in South America, the Caribbean. They're having problems with Zika. And what it does, and of course the Olympics are going to be in that area, and people are afraid, some people are afraid to go, and they have pulled out of the Olympics because they don't want to get Zika, because they're afraid that if they have a child, the child will have birth defects, which is a distinct possibility. So let me just get started and discuss what we know about Zika, which is not very much. Some people have a lot of symptoms of Zika and they get quite sick, very sick. Other people hardly know they have it. They have a few little symptoms here and there, and in a week it's gone, and it doesn't pose any problems for them. But it's what it does internally that's important. You can have Zika and not have hardly any symptoms, and it does go out of the blood within a week. It only stays in the blood for a week. But then what about the rest of the body? Does it leave an imprint on the rest of the body? Could it be that some of the virus stays in other bodily fluids? Blood is only one bodily fluid. You've got the cerebrospinal fluid. You've got other fluids in the body. Could it last longer in those fluids and so therefore continue its devastation on the human being? Nobody knows this for sure, but it's things we need to bring up. So let me talk to you about one case of Zika in which an individual did have a lot of symptoms. This was a 27-year-old female, and she was living overseas, and her boyfriend was also living overseas. She woke up one morning with a nasty hangover. Now, she hadn't been drinking, but the feeling was like she had been drinking, and she felt like she had had a hangover. She was exhausted. Her head pounded with pain. She had fever, she had chills, and a few days she had severe joint and muscle pain. She had an itchy kind of conjunctivitis, which, as you know, affects the eyes, and the eyes itch with it. And then a few days later, she developed an orange rash, and it started on her face, and then it progressed to the rest of her body, throughout her body. And it's described kind of like a reddish orange, so there's definitely an orange tinge to it. And her apartment didn't have any air conditioning, and her windows were open, and mosquitoes actually lived in her house or in her apartment. So it would be easy for her to pick up an illness. No screens on the windows, open windows, hot air, no air conditioning, and the mosquitoes lived in the house. So it's almost like a given she's going to pick up something. Now, many people who have Zika don't have a lot of symptoms. Some don't even know they have it, but it lasts just a few days and then it goes, as I've mentioned before. The problem is if a woman is pregnant and the baby is in the third trimester of the pregnancy, the baby will develop microcephalic behavior, microcephaly, and the baby will have a small pointed head. It's like a pointy head, and it's small, like this. Now, I've seen these babies, I've seen babies. I used to work in a place that they took care of babies and people who had kind of disabilities and body dysfunctions, and some of them had really unusual things wrong with them. And I've seen microcephalic babies. And it is unusual. You see a baby and suddenly the head is like about this big. The rest of the body is fairly normal size. I'm not sure how big these babies would grow. I don't know how big they actually get, whether they get to be a normal-sized human being because the growth hormone isn't affected. But these babies were fairly small, but their heads were like minuscule, very, very tiny. It was an unusual thing to see. And I have read also that if you take a look at the brain of a microcephalic baby, the brain is about the size of a prune. You know how big a prune is, like this. Very, very small brain. The head is small too. They're not going to ever grow to be normal size, at least their heads aren't. And their brains are so small, they're not going to have enough nerve cells to be able to learn and grow normally. And so they're going to be pretty much dependent on care for the rest of their lives. They're not going to grow up to be normal human beings. They're going to be in bed all the time. Someone's going to have to take care of them because their brains aren't going to make it. They're just not going to make it. So they require care for a lifetime. Zika was discovered in 1947 in Uganda. And that's a country in Africa, toward the middle of Africa. And in 2007, 900 people were infected. Most of them didn't even know they had the illness, or the symptoms were very mild and it didn't bother them. In 2013, 31,000 people had it. And on the French islands off the coast of France, people were getting it. 31,000 people had it. And in 2014, it spread to Brazil. And in 2015, dozens of babies were born, and some of them with small pointed heads. So right away, they started putting two and two together. Brazil has 1.5 million people that have Zika. And 1,500 babies have been born, and they have microcephaly. So it is a very, very great danger to a pregnant person. Well, what if the person gets it in the first trimester and they don't have many symptoms and the virus leaves the bloodstream in about a week? It doesn't stay in the bloodstream. Will they still be affected? Will the babies still get sick? Will the mothers get infected? Will they have something done internally because of the virus, even though they maybe not have many symptoms, or they may have a lot of symptoms like this person I just mentioned? But what is it going to do to the internal structures of the body, regardless of whether they have serious symptoms or mild symptoms? And what if they're pregnant in the first trimester? Does it go on, and is there damage to the baby's brain? Well, I have read that babies whose mothers got Zika virus in the first trimester, their heads were fairly normal size, but they're not sure if there was brain damage, and they're not sure if brain function is going to be affected by the virus. Even though their heads are normal, their brains may not be. But these are things we just don't know yet, and we're trying to find out. In Puerto Rico, there is a health disaster, and a lot of it is due to the Zika virus. Also, the government is in debt by like $70 billion. They're having a real financial crisis in Puerto Rico. And the country has closed some of its hospitals because they just can't afford to keep them open due to this financial crisis. And 3,000 doctors have left Puerto Rico. They can't practice because they can't use hospitals because the finances are so bad. And the healthcare system could collapse. And so anyone who is poor and sick, they're not guaranteed of having any help. And most get government help for medical problems, but that money is going to dry up. By 2017, the government won't be able to support anyone who has a medical condition. So it looks like the whole healthcare system could completely collapse. And the Zika will push Puerto Rico over the edge financially. There are many mosquitoes that develop in countries like Puerto Rico and Brazil, and they have a lot of hot weather, and they have a lot of floods. So you may have an area that has a lot of rubber tires, let's say, and the water gets in the tires and sits there. The mosquitoes develop, and many of them will be carrying diseases. Also, with the floods, they don't necessarily have garbage takeaway. They have garbage in the street. So what a perfect way for mosquitoes to develop. And when they don't have air conditioning and they can't close their windows and they don't have good medical care and the hospitals are closing and the doctors are leaving, this is a recipe for disaster. Without garbage collection, there's filth. There is a mosquito called the cockroach mosquito, and it carries a host of diseases, and anyone who gets bitten by one might get any one of those diseases that it's carrying. And also, there are 3,500 species of mosquitoes in those nations, Brazil, Puerto Rico, 3,500 species of mosquitoes. All of them could be carrying different kinds of diseases. Now, in the United States, there are 618 cases of the Zika virus in the United States, and 195 of these patients are pregnant women. There's already been one birth that's occurred in this 195, and the baby has microcephaly. So you can see how dangerous that's going to be. And the mother contracted Zika outside of the United States. You know, the Olympics are coming in that area, and a lot of people just aren't going to go because they're afraid of getting Zika. They're afraid of what it's going to do to their families. They're afraid of what it's going to do to themselves. Men aren't going because they're afraid if they get it, they may pass it on to their wives. And if the wives are pregnant, the babies will be sick, or they'll have some kind of a malformation, or the brain won't be working right. So I can understand the real caution that people have about going to South America and the countries in that area where a lot of the Zika is. There is reports that Zika can be passed by sexual transmission, but most of the transmission is due through mosquitoes and mosquito bites. Zika stays in the blood system, as I said before, only for about a week, but does it live longer in other parts of the body? Could it infest an organ, or could it get into a different kind of body fluid, such as the cerebrospinal fluid, and live there for a much longer period of time? You know, if you study drugs, and I've done a lot of studying and a lot of teaching about drugs, LSD stays in the system. The system may be like return to normal, but there are traces of LSD in the spinal column for months after the person has recovered from their episode of the hallucinogenic experience because of using LSD. There's just enough in the spinal cord so you're not rid of it. So the question here, and I know that Zika is not a drug, it's a virus, but what happens to the body? Does the body retain any of the damage, or does it retain any of the illness? Even if it's not in the system, in the blood system, it may be somewhere else, but nobody knows that for sure. And the location of Zika is basically Puerto Rico and Brazil. The southern cities of Florida and Texas are at risk because a lot of travel goes on between those South American countries and the southern part of Florida and the southern part of Texas, and people go back and forth a lot. So there's the possibility of a lot of transmission there. And there are 40 million travelers that go between the United States and areas of where Zika is prominent. So that is something that we have to think about, because that's going to be a problem. Now, I'm going to start eating disorders. I'm not going to get all the way through it, but I'm going to get part of the way through it. But since we have some time left, I don't just want to leave that time untouched. So we're going from the Zika virus to eating disorders. Now, eating disorders, eating is important. You have to eat. You have to have nutrition in order to sustain life. But eating behavior behavior is influenced by culture and society. Eating is a social activity. And, you know, for example, you go to a concert. My sister and I will go to a concert. What do we do right after the concert? We go out to eat. You meet somebody new, you want to get to know them, they want to get to know you. What do? You go out to eat or have a cup of coffee or something. You want to lose weight, so what do? You change your eating pattern because you want to have less weight because you think you'll be more popular if you're thinner. So the eating disorders that we have, and I'm going to go into them, are based upon our physiological need to have nutrition and also society's expectations. We want to be thin as a nation. We want to be thin, or at least most of us do, because we think we're more popular, we look better, people like us more, they have more respect for us if we are thin. Now, I have one of my best friends weighed about 400 pounds. In fact, 2 or 3 of my friends weighed that much. And it's really kind of bad on them because people look at them, they stare at them, they bully them, they make comments, but they can't seem to stop their eating. But when they try, it's very painful for them to lose weight because they want to eat. And part of the problem is they're never full. You know, the hypothalamus has a lot to do with the way we eat and our hunger, whether we're hungry or whether we're not hungry. And if we eat normally, it lets us know when we have enough. And we can tell when we have enough, and therefore we stop eating. But what if you're always hungry and you never can get rid of the hunger? I had in one of the schools where I taught at, there was a boy who was a student there. He's like a sophomore in high school, and he was very, very large. And his father taught there. He was one of the teachers and staff members, and we talked together about it. And he said, you know, my son never feels full. He always feels hungry. And the thing that you want to do when you're hungry is to eat. And you'll search out anywhere to get food or to snack or to eat some crackers. Now, I had a good friend of mine that I used to go to the Olive Shoals with every year. And when I went to the Olive Shoals, the only way you can get that, it's like an island, and it's surrounded by the ocean. It's a beautiful place. You're pretty much off the grid. You don't have computers or phones or anything like that there, so you don't have any internet access, so it's truly a vacation. It's a beautiful island. And when you go out, the only way you can get out there is by boat. There's no airport there, so you go out by boat, and it's 7 miles off the coast of Portsmouth. But there's snacks everywhere. You know, there's a little restaurant there on Star Island, and then you get a little snack bar and restaurant area in the boat that takes you out. Well, I can eat lunch, or I could have breakfast, and I'd be all right until lunch. About 2 hours or so after she ate, she would have to eat another lunch. You know, so she would eat twice as much as I did. And she kept saying, I hate my body, I hate my body, I hate the way it looks, I feel gross, I look gross, people think I look gross. I can't stop eating because I'm always hungry. I can't get over the feeling of being hungry. And it's really a sad situation, and a lot of people who are obese have this problem. They just feel hungry all the time. So the eating disorders that we have are partly based upon what society thinks of us if we're too heavy. I remember I lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks when I became diabetic, and that's one of the early symptoms of diabetes. You lose a tremendous amount of weight, and you lose it fast. And everybody thought I'd become anorexic, and that wasn't the case. I was eating normally, and I kept losing weight, but that was because of the diabetes. You do have a period of time when you're first diagnosed, before you're diagnosed, that you have incredible weight loss, and that's what I was experiencing. And I had people come up to me where I was working and say, you got to eat tonight. Now remember, you got to eat. And the thing that they didn't realize is that I was eating normally. So there are medical reasons for losing weight. There are medical reasons for gaining weight, glandular disorders, hormonal disorders. The hypothalamus doesn't work right. You're becoming diabetic or having some other disease where it's possible to lose weight. A lot of weight is lost when you have AIDS. If a person has AIDS, one of the symptoms is a tremendous loss of weight in 1 month. that's almost a surefire sign of an illness, and AIDS would be one of those illnesses that would be on the short list to examine. So it's a complex issue. You want to eat, you have to eat. It's not like being an alcoholic where you could stop if you want to stop, if you're able to stop, because you have to eat. If you had to drink to survive, then it would be very difficult for an alcoholic to stop drinking because they'd have to drink something. That with food, you have to eat something. So I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with eating disorders next time. I think you'll find it interesting. Then there's a lot that I have to say about it. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.